called out on this because I called Donald Trump a wannabe dictator. It's because he is. It's because he is. Oh, the governor's being mean and the governor's speaking out on that. Well, maybe it's time for us to be a little meaner. Maybe it's time for us to be a little more fierce. Because we have to ferociously push back on this. And again, I'll speak to my teacher colleagues in here. The thing that bothers a teacher more than anything is to watch a bully, to watch this bully and to stop it. And when it's a child, you talk to them and you tell them why bullying's wrong. But when it's adult like Donald Trump, you bully the shit out of him back. You push back.
We don't have any direct links. However, there were some flyers that said no kings within the suspect vehicle. And as we know, the planned events throughout the state of Minnesota today is a No Kings event.
Before we begin this video, I want to make it clear to everyone that this is a developing and ongoing situation. And so this is by no means an attempt to reach a final verdict or rush to conclusions. As a matter of fact, I'm making the case for the opposite. I'm actively saying, hey, if you are going to immediately politicize a tragedy, then the facts better actually be on your side, right? For instance, if you are going to immediately rush to blame Donald Trump and MAGA supporters for a tragic event, it better actually be true that the attacker was a supporter of Donald Trump and MAGA. And thus far in the situation you're seeing out of Minnesota early today, again, we don't know the full story. Seems to me, by all accounts, this guy was some type of schizophrenic, mentally ill loon bag when you put the whole piece and story together. But immediately, you saw Democrats in the early hours, like for instance, Ed Kratzenstein right here, going out and saying, quote, Trump needs to stop stoking violence with his hateful rhetoric directed at Democrats. You also saw here from Kyle Kulinski, just a really ridiculous statement here. This is recklessly irresponsible. He immediately went out to say that a, quote, pro-Trump terrorist killed Minnesota Democrats in the horrific attack here today. And so in this video, I want to give the actual full story of what we know thus far. And again, make a strong case here. Perhaps, maybe there's a little more to the situation than that meets the eye. We'll tell you about it. First, though, folks, as usual, do us a favor. If you enjoy our coverage, if you appreciate staying up to date with all the latest news stories and headlines, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Subscribing is not only the best way to support our videos, but ensure that you never miss a single story. And with that said, so this all, of course, begins earlier today with a horrific and tragic and contemptible attack out of Minnesota, where, as you can see, 2 Democrat lawmakers in Minnesota, that being Democrat Senator John Hoffman and Representative Melissa Hortman, were shot in their homes by a gunman who was impersonating a police officer. It is well established by now that this was not some type of random act of violence, right? These were indeed politically motivated, targeted assassination attempts. I think the only question is, what actually went down there, right? Why did it immediately happen? Now, that said, without, again, knowing anything about this story, and frankly, I think it rings eerily similar to the Boulder, Colorado attack that you saw just a couple weeks ago, where MSNBC early on was saying that a white male, right, they're reporting, oh, white male is the suspect. Hours later, it gets confirmed that, as a matter of fact, this individual was an illegal alien from Egypt who came to the United States under Joe Biden era immigration open border policies, and then they just stopped talking about it. Take a listen here in the early hours as MSNBC immediately rushes to pin this act of political violence on Trump, of course, totally ignoring the fact that for the past several weeks, Democrats have been literally committing massive acts of political violence in the streets. But take a listen.
Given this is also not a normal question, because I'm going to ask it about the Department of Justice, which heretofore, prior to this administration, it's always been held that the Department of Justice is an apolitical body. Do you see it as such now? And if you don't, the fact that these are 2 Democratic lawmakers that have been attacked, one killed and one right now fighting for his life in a hospital after being shot multiple times, do you have any doubt, any concern that because of political differences, biases, this will not be addressed the way it should be?
It should be apolitical, right? That's what we have seen from Republican and Democratic administrations up until this one. Right now, Donald Trump has in place people who are more loyal to him than they are to the Constitution and the rule of law. And what really, if I can bring just rewind the tape, if I can, just 4 months ago, we saw this president pardon violent January 6 offenders, people who were convicted.
1,500 of them.
1,500. He just pardoned them. That, to me, normalized political violence. These are people, Alex, that he summoned to Washington. He told them, come to D.C. We'll be wild, he says in a tweet. And they come to Washington at his behest. They come with their zip ties. They come with their weapons. They come with their bear spray. And he tells them to march down to the Capitol and to fight like hell. And they do exactly that until he tells them to stop. And so now he gets back in office and he pardons them. That, to me, is the normalization of political violence. And
I can understand why you say it that way. Absolutely.
So immediately, without knowing anything about the situation, MSNBC is basically saying no matter who it was, apparently, even if it's a leftist, it's apparently Donald Trump's fault for normalizing political violence, which I guess the argument there as well is that the political violence that you've seen again by the left over the past couple of weeks is somehow also the fault of Donald Trump, because he made people mean, guys. He just made people upset, right? As you can see, similarly, immediately in the hours of this reporting, MSNBC immediately went on to interview the organizer of the No Kings protest that you're seeing across America today. And this individual goes on to state that, yes, we have too many people in elected officials, including the current occupant of the White House, who escalate violent rhetoric against political opponents, and that leads to these tragic events. Of course, I assume here, completely forgetting, number one, the assassination attempts against Donald Trump that took place in the year of 2024. But yeah, secondly here, once again, I will reiterate, basically making the argument that even if we don't know what happened, it must somehow be the fault of Donald Trump because he's just like the boogeyman of every single story. Here was the No Kings protester reacting to what happened in Minnesota.
By the overwhelming majority of Americans, regardless of political party and regardless of who the subject of the assassination is. That's a very red line that'll be crossed. And I wonder if some of these protests around the country, including yours, whether that's a unifying force where people are going to come out and say, we want our democracy a certain way. We have the right to protest. It's a First Amendment right. We don't cross lines into political violence.
Yeah, I would hope so. I would hope that this is a unifying moment, but unfortunately, as we've seen time and time again, it usually isn't. We have too many people and too many elected officials, including the current occupant of the White House, who escalates rhetoric and violent rhetoric against political opponents, and that leads to these kinds of tragic events. It is absolutely unacceptable, and every single elected official should be condemning this, regardless of their political party. But I don't have the greatest hope for some people to actually come out and do that, unfortunately.
Yeah, so apparently now the side who has been committing political violence in the streets for the past 2 weeks, downplaying it, basically saying to what extent it happens, that's Donald Trump's fault. It's like, it's our fault. It's the fault of the people not committing the violence that the violence is doing, not the perpetrators, right? They're now demanding that we condemn the political violence. It's our fault, guys, that we won't do it. Okay, I know I'm going to shock everyone right now. Wow, everyone's so surprised to hear this. But indeed, yes, I do condemn political violence. I absolutely condemn what happened in Minnesota today. It is a horrific and tragic and disgusting attack. It's abhorrent. And by the way, guess who else has done it? Oh, wow, big surprise here. Donald Trump, he went out and said, quotes, "I have been briefed on the terrible shooting that took place in Minnesota, which appeared to be a targeted attack against our state lawmakers. Our Attorney General Pam Bondi and the FBI are investigating the situation. They will be prosecuting anyone involved to the fullest extent of the law. Such horrific violence will not be tolerated in the United States of America. God bless the people of Minnesota, a truly great place." And here's the thing, by the way, too, okay? Even from a purely strategic perspective, which obviously shouldn't be talked about even in the conversation of political violence. But it's also worth noting, especially for the right wing, because again, they're going to keep claiming, oh, this is all what we want to do, that political violence is completely unconstructive, right? It is counterproductive for the right wing, for MAGA and Trump specifically, considering the fact that we are literally the ones who have the power right now in the country, okay? So why would the right wing even need to necessarily go out and do these like random acts of terror or intimidation when we could just pass laws or, I don't know, do stuff, right? That we actually want to see fulfilled as our political agenda. So that goes without saying. But again, this is just the massive reporting that you're constantly hearing. Oh, the right wing won't condemn the political violence. No, we obviously do. It's horrific what happened. By the way, specifically on the case of these two Democrats who were targeted, we're not even talking here about necessarily far left lawmakers, as we'll talk about in a second, number one, but also number two, again, not only is it immoral and disgusting and shameful, it goes against anything strategic, frankly, that Trump and the right wing want to do in this country. It makes absolutely no sense, okay? So with that said, here's where the story, of course, gets very interesting and why I once again reiterate that the Democrats are already starting to backtrack on what actually happened today in Minnesota. Because as the details came out from the police department, one notable fact was that apparently, as you can see, the Minnesota assassin was found to have a bunch of these No Kings flyers in his car that were found by law enforcement. Of course, No Kings is the big theme today of the protest you're seeing against Donald Trump, right? You know, you can see right here, actually, as a matter of fact, Governor Tim Walz was scheduled earlier to speak today at the No Kings protest out of Twin Cities. Some people are speculating, hey, wait a minute. We're immediately assuming this guy's a right-winger just because he's targeting Democrats. Why are there No Kings flyers? Okay, again, I'm not saying the guy's a left-winger. I'm not saying the guy's a Democrat. What I'm saying is there's a lot more to this story that meets the eye, and hence why we ought to go through these facts here sort of one by one. So again, connected to No Kings, or at least he had those flyers in his car. As you can see, here is the video of Minnesota law enforcement, of course, confirming that fact. Yes, he did indeed have a bunch of No Kings papers in his vehicle. Take a listen.
Are there reasons to believe that these events were also targeted by the person in the manifesto in the car?
We don't have any direct links. However, there were some flyers that said No Kings within the suspect vehicle. And as we know, the planned events throughout the state of Minnesota today is a No Kings event.
Still no update on the status of the suspect?
I don't have any information on the ongoing investigation right now.
On the list of targets, for lack of a better term, are all of the people on the list, have they all been notified, and do they have law enforcement presence with them?
Again, that is part of the investigation right now, so I'm not going to answer those. Thank you.
So, I'm sorry, as I mentioned, we're getting to investigatory information. I'll leave that to Superintendent.
Yeah, and good afternoon again, everyone, or good morning. Drew Evans, Superintendent of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension.
Superintendent, can we have it quiet out there so everybody can hear? Thank you.
What I wanted to note, though, is part of this, the references, the individual that is a person of interest that we've talked about, or individuals, are not in custody at this time. And so the reference materials that were inside of the vehicle that we saw, we have no understanding that any of the No Kings events would be targeted, but we also find it of interest to the public that these would be in there, and we want to alert everybody until we do that. Because this is such an active investigation with information not knowing right now, we feel it's an obligation to all of you and the public across the state of Minnesota to alert you of it, and that's why the Colonel made the notation of recommending people don't go today. But the individuals are not in custody yet, and so we want to make sure as that very active manhunt is underway and continues, that we make sure that we're sharing that, and that's part of why we're making the recommendation. As to that investigation and the list, we are working through that now and talking to individuals, and we'll continue to. What I would say with the list is there's a large number of people. That's all I can say about it. We will work through all of that, what the motivations of this are, and we'll provide that as you can. This is really a public safety announcement for everybody so that we can make sure people are informed and make safe decisions throughout the day.
So look, obviously common sense here says two things could be true. Either he had the No Kings flyers in his car because he was in support of No Kings, or it could be the opposite. It could be because he was trying to target No Kings. Nobody knows at the current moment. That's, of course, why I'm trying to make the case. Maybe we should not rush to conclusions on this, right? But, you know, amidst so much immediately being blamed on Trump and the right wing, I feel like that's worth noting. It's also worth noting here that apparently this individual right here, the suspect who has now been identified as Vance Boelter, was apparently a political, or government, I should say, government appointee of none other than Governor Tim Walz. That is correct. As you can see here, the reporting from the New York Post. Former appointee of Tim Walz sought in deadly shootings of Minnesota lawmakers, had No Kings flyers in their cars, as you can see, yes. A former appointee of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who's being sought in connection there. Allegedly, this guy, of course, yes, posed as a police officer, goes on here. But apparently, Boelter, who is 57 years old, was appointed in 2019 to serve a 4-year stint on the Governor's Workforce Development Board, according to documents. He was previously serving on the Governor's Workforce Development Council in 2016 under then Governor Mark Dayton. And so, yes, this guy was, appointed as an employee of Tim Walz. So does that mean he's a Democrat? Is that why he did it? Again, we're just actually giving you the full context of the story. But going on here, right? Again, the killer, yes, had flyers with the words "No Kings" in his car, which is a reference to the Saturday planned protest against the Trump administration, as well as a manifesto with a list of other politicians' names, which we'll get to here in a second. Now, with that said, though, so we got "No Kings" flyers. The guy worked for Tim Walz. It's also worth noting particularly that the 2 Democrat lawmakers here who were actually targeted, we're not talking about some like far left resist lib, type of Democrats. As a matter of fact, let's go through these one by one. For instance, Minnesota Representative Melissa Hortman, this is the individual who was tragically shot and killed in her home, was apparently, guys, the same exact Democrat who just a few days ago did a very bold thing for her party when she actually went out. She's the lone Democrat, guys, the only Democrat in the Minnesota State House to go out, make a stand, and vote against illegal aliens receiving Medicaid. That is right. This is the Democrat we're talking about. Again, not some type of far left Trump deranged lunatic. This is the Democrat who was targeted by Vance Boelter, which of course, does not make a definitive verdict on the situation, but is worth noting this is who we're talking about.
I know that people will be hurt by that vote, and we worked very hard to try to get a budget deal that wouldn't include that provision.
DFL Speaker Emerita Melissa Hortman emotional following the House's adjournment from a special session Monday. Hortman was the lone DFL lawmaker to cast a vote to cut Minnesota Care access for undocumented immigrants. It's a move she made with a heavy heart.
I did what leaders do. I stepped up and I got the job done for the people of Minnesota.
The bill was deeply unpopular with members of the DFL caucus. Members have repeatedly expressed frustration that the bill was part of a compromise, one that would ensure the necessary GOP votes to pass the rest of the state budget.
We are tremendously disappointed and gut-wrenched at this decision, at this compromise that compromises our communities that are most vulnerable.
Hortman knows she let down her own caucus members with the vote.
They're right to be mad at me. I think some of them are pretty angry. I think that their job was to make folks who voted for that bill feel like crap, and I think that they succeeded.
Over in the Senate, a similar situation unfolded. Senate Majority Leader Erin Murphy forced to vote for a bill she too disagreed with to uphold the integrity of their compromise.
This one hurt. This one is a wound because of its reason. My colleagues across the aisle set this as their number one priority.
Asked whether the move would drive a wedge between her and the rest of her caucus, her DFL colleague, Senator John Marty, quickly stepped to her defense.
As a member of the caucus, yes, sir, she clearly was fighting against it every step of the way. In the negotiations, if we wanted a budget, we had to agree to that. She agreed to put up one vote for us because of that.
Reporting in St. Paul.
So the one Democrat in the Minnesota State House who voted against free health care for illegal aliens was the one who got targeted. We don't know much else, but I'm just saying that is an interesting note to keep in mind here when you also hear the guy worked for Tim Walz, the guy had no Kings flyers, et cetera, et cetera. It's worth noting as well that the other Democrat state legislator who was targeted here, Mr. John Hoffman, is also a part of this Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, right, which by my understanding is something of a moderate caucus in the Minnesota state politics. Also has recently voted against party lines, kind of taken a moderate stance on situations. In early 2025, he sided with Republicans in the Minnesota Senate to delay the implementation of the paid family leave and medical leave program, a decision that diverged from most DFL senators and stirred controversy within his party. As you know, Representative Melissa bravely, in the end here, tragically, did also vote to repeal free healthcare for illegals, which has already well been established now by this point. So again, so I think there's clearly two possibilities that we're seeing so far. Maybe the person three, I should say. Maybe the person just hated Democrats because they were some type of far-right extremist, but it's also possible, and I think there are some indications in the direction it could be. We don't know, it could be. The guy could also be a far leftist, who was actually targeting, in his eyes, right, the Democrats who are not falling in line properly, who are being too soft on Trump and the agenda or whatever. Again, we don't exactly know here, but this is probably a case why immediately the move to go out and blame Donald Trump for what happened is absurd. It is deranged. It's very unclear. And by the way, the third possibility, the guy could just be a schizophrenic, mentally ill lunatic, which is frankly the direction I'm leaning at the current moment. But, there is more, I guess, to talk about here. Apparently, this guy also has a bit of a weird personal past. He's the director here of a security patrol firm in Minnesota, right? Ironically, it's called Praetorian. So this is how he had access to this vehicle that they thought was law enforcement. He's been involved with security situations in Eastern Europe, Africa, North America, and the Middle East, including the West Bank. Okay, so he's been to Gaza, the southern Lebanon, the Gaza Strip. He brings a security aspect forged by many on-the-ground experiences combined with both private security firms and people in the U.S. military. He's worked for an oil refinery company, which some might say that's like right-wing coded. But then it's also worth noting here, this guy similarly, personal history here all over the place, right? Extremely strange, okay? It's like, like USAID would write this script is the comment a lot of people are making. By the way, I'm not saying there's any connection to USAID, okay? What it is to say is you look at this guy's kind of strange past where he's been all over the world. It's like something definitely is, up, I guess you would say, right, with his sort of personal history here. Vance Boelter, the alleged suspect in the shooting of these lawmakers, was, as you can see here, the CEO of a U.S. government-subsidized private protection agency known as the Red Lions Group. Red Lions Group received over $20,000 in small business loans under the SBA program, which you'll see here in a second seems to be a little bit of a fraudulent request, but nonetheless, Boelter is listed as the CEO of Red Lions Group, which was active in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's like, what is going on with it? I don't know, right? But anyways, he is highlighted in the Minnesota African Union website. The Minnesota African Union website states that it is a, quote, statewide umbrella organization that is focused on the well-being of the immigrant community. In other words, guys, this is one of the many different NGOs that is responsible for facilitating the mass migration of migrants pouring into this country, right? You saw many of those under the Biden administration. They've been around even longer than Biden. So he was involved here. So, it's like you could almost say, okay, so oil refinery, special ops around the world, that seems right-wing of him, but also being involved in some type of global charity where he's facilitating mass migration of migrants from Africa. Yeah, that's not exactly like a MAGA Republican thing to do, right? So again, a lot more to the story than meets the eye. Former Minnesota State House leader Melissa Hortman, a Democrat, yes, was targeted here. Boelter, as we went over earlier, was reportedly also appointed as a member of the Governor's Workforce Development Council. Yes, no King's rallies. Flyers were found in his car. So with all of this in mind, again, okay, I think at this point you can basically deduce what's going on. We're a little confused. You see leftists now suddenly making this type of rhetoric the mainstream, like Yashar Ali, who works for the New York Post, for instance, or New York Magazine and Huffington Post, I should say. Huffington Post here says, it's fascinating that people are willing to jump to this conclusion, but aren't willing to acknowledge that law enforcement also found the names of abortion providers and of pro-abortion rights activists on the shooter's hit list. Many conservative accounts are conveniently not mentioning this bit. And for the record, there are sick people of every political ideology. I find the willingness of people to jump to conclusions based on no real evidence to be horrible. Right, so we'll talk about the abortion thing here in a second. I'm going to address that at the end of the video. But so now, right, they're saying that, oh, don't rush to conclusions, guys. After the left wing spent the whole morning rushing to conclusions, now the conservatives, they're saying, hey, conservatives, don't you rush to conclusions. It's pretty interesting to witness, to say the least. Now, with that said, so apparently this reference to the abortion thing is that ever since, right, Minnesota police won't tell us exactly what is in this list, but apparently there is a hit list of 70 names. Some of those include pro-choice activists, I guess abortion centers. CNN has also reported that list includes pro-life activists, which also makes me seem like, okay, if both of those are true, this guy's just a crazy schizophrenic. Apparently, they have also included 2 Democrat lawmakers, including Governor Tim Walz and Ilhan Omar. But it's very notable here they're just telling us a few names. They're not telling us the whole 70. So that's why I say, okay, so there's some Democrats on the list, some pro-choice. Apparently, this CNN guy also said that there's pro-life on the list. Who are the other 70, right? Is it all Democrats, or is it like a bunch of both? Is this guy just some like anti-government terrorist who's after everyone? We don't exactly know, but take a listen here to the apparently full context, according to CNN, of who is being listed on this manifesto, allegedly, that they won't show to the public.
Where police say a gunman shot and killed Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark early this morning at their home. Police say the same gunman also shot Minnesota State Senator John Hoffman and his wife multiple times at their home. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is calling the attacks a politically motivated assassination. Here's more of what he said earlier today.
I assure you that those responsible for this will be held accountable, and each and every one of us are committed to making sure that a tragedy like this never repeats itself in Minnesota or across this country.
We have team coverage. Let's start with CNN Chief Law Enforcement and Intelligence Analyst John Miller. What have you learned about this hit list that police say was found in the suspect's car? He's now on foot. He left the vehicle and possibly a lot of other valuable tools.
Well, the car is a treasure trove of clues and potential clues, not just forensically, but things in plain sight. What we're told from law enforcement sources briefed on the investigation is that there are a cache of additional weapons inside that car, indicating that the suspect was loaded for additional targets, possible confrontations with law enforcement or security, a large amount of ammunition. In an ammunition bag, they found a Father's Day card, presumably addressed to the suspect. But there is also this manifesto which lays out his issues, and on top of that, a very, very long list of names, approximately 70 names. This includes numerous state legislators from Minnesota, but it also includes other elected officials, a couple of mayors. It includes other places in Minnesota, including medical clinics, abortion providers, pro-life advocates, and it includes some locations and individuals from out of state. What does that tell us? It poses the question of what was the ultimate game plan? Was it to continue to get through this list, to go as far down with as many attacks or assassinations as possible until he was stopped by police? What we know now is that at his first location, he did his first attack in the pre-dawn hours of the morning in the darkness, that preemptively police went to the second location where the nearest other elected state official was and ran straight into the suspect. The Brooklyn Park, Minnesota police exchanged shots with the individual, which caused him to flee towards the house and then into the darkness. But that also made him leave that car, all of that evidence, and potentially part of his plan behind. Now, with the idea that they exchanged gunfire, the fact that he was described as wearing a tactical vest, probably body armor, likely bullet resistant, he may be wounded, or the vest may have deflected that, but he is with whatever weapons he had on him, without a vehicle, and still theoretically on the move somewhere in that area that he could have gotten by foot.
Yeah, so again, we don't know what happened. The facts seem to contradict each other in many ways, right? On one hand, he's part of some pro-mass migration left-wing NGO. On the other hand, some said he was targeting pro-choice abortion activists. But CNN there also said they had pro-life activists on the list. It's all over the place, okay? Which is, again, hence why it's probably not a good idea to immediately go out and claim that, like, right-wingers are guilty of perpetrating a violent act when there's no evidence that right-wingers even did this, okay? So with that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.